Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of Digital Drop. Today, I'm pleased to be joined by Adrian Goddard. Adrian works for the Chartered Institute of Payroll Professionals. Welcome to the show, Adrian.
Thank you,Nej. It's a pleasure to be invited onto the show. So I've been looking forward to this.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you here. So, Adrian, today we're going to be talking about why junior voices matter and how listening down the ladder can drive big results for an organization. This is a topic that we brainstormed on, and it's something that's particularly close to your heart. But before we dig into that, why don't you maybe, for the benefit of our listeners, tell us a little bit more about yourself and the role that you play at the moment?
Absolutely. My role at the CIPP is as the commercial director. So basically, I support all things marketing, sales, events, and also policy and advisory within the Chartered Institute of Payroll Professionals. I've got six leaders that report into me and around 35 staff members, but we're really responsible for championing the payroll industry, elevating payroll, and working closely with government in regards to the direction of the payroll profession. And it's to the magnitude that our industry actually contributes one of the largest portions of revenue for the government through taxation and national insurance, which amounts to around £500 billion.
Oh, wow. Okay, that's quite significant. So when we were brainstorming about what we wanted to discuss, we touched upon this idea about junior voices, and it's something that you were particularly keen on. So maybe tell me a little bit more about what inspired this idea, that junior voices can have a powerful impact within an organization.
Yeah, I think absolutely, Suneja. I think ultimately it comes down to effective listening. And actually, as a senior leader, not being too far away, from various layers of hierarchy within the organization, and also consumers, those that you're actually responsible for within industry. So I'll delve into the example that I give in just a moment. But one thing that I learned, I've been in leadership now for over a decade. And one thing that I'd observed from my own experience of leaders and from what I thought or I've grown to believe to be of great value as a leader is actually being still relatively close to the front line, even though you may have senior and strategic responsibility. And that means not just your direct reports, but also those who are, ma- supporting our clients, for example, our members and whatnot, our partners, those who are more junior staff members, and also spending as much time as reasonably possible in those that we're actually serving. And I saw that as actually an effective way of leadership, and that's what I've tried to live and embody, myself as a director. So yeah, the example that I wanted to highlight and somebody that we're really proud of within the institute, one of our marketing executives earlier on this year, he had an idea. He had a great idea about our annual conference, which is our flagship event at the CIPP, which we host at the Celtic Manor, generally the first week of October each year. And this idea, a guy called Sam, he had an idea back in March time, I think it was, and he mentioned it to our marketing manager. I remember in one of our leadership meetings in March that she presented the idea, to myself and the other leaders in the commercial function, and kind of dwelled on it, for a few moments. I thought, you know what? Might just be a good idea. Like, why don't we just explore it? Why don't we see what it could become? And it's also an opportunity for somebody who is, a more junior staff member to actually put forward a creative idea that would be quite impactful, not just for us as an institute, but also for our industry at large as well. And that was really the initial point of creating what we call now Ace Fest,
Okay.
which is basically a festival that we hosted on the first day of our 2-day event. And yeah, we went through the process of building out this idea. and we did it, and it was so impactful that our members have said, and there's a number of reasons to why they've made this comment, but I know that Ace Fest was also a key part of it, that this is the best annual conference that they've ever attended and that they
Wow.
thoroughly enjoyed. And staff member who doesn't really have, any kind of leadership responsibilities or anything like that, that staff member played a vital part in creating something incredible for
Yeah.
our institute and for our members. But the fundamental was just taking some time to listen and hear what they have to say.
Yeah, well, a huge shout out to Sam. Yeah, but what I have to also recognize is that you have given that recognition to the person, to the junior person, and unfortunately, in a lot of scenarios, senior or mid-tier management, if a great idea has come up with, essentially tried to take credit for that idea, and I think that's certainly a culture that you see a lot within the membership sector. So hats off to you as well for giving credit where credit is due. Um, and
Thank
I
you.
couldn't agree with you more. I remember when I first started out in my career that I always used to think that some of the senior management was so detached from the reality of what's going on the ground that I always tried to embody the same principles as a leader, but it's easier said than done,
Yeah.
especially when you're working in a large organization. So, what do you think is it that creates barriers within organizations, either cultural barriers or operational barriers that make it difficult to actually listen and proactively pay attention to that less experienced, I don't want to say lower tier,
Yeah.
but the less experienced tier of colleagues?
Uh, To be honest, I think the one of the fundamental blockers there is time. The higher up you go in leadership, the more weight of responsibility you have to carry, and the more demands there are on your time. And the fact is that you typically don't have the level of flexibility to be able to spend the time where you'd like to spend the time versus where you have to spend the time. So for you to be able to afford time to invest in other people and to be able to connect with them, especially those who are not directly reporting into you, something's got to give, right? But it's a case of how valuable is it to be connected versus the other demands that you're responsible for as a senior leader. And like I said, for me, because I've lived the experience of seeing the implications of being disconnected at a senior level and really not having, I guess, the most, well, in my opinion, probably the most rounded perspective of a situation in how you apply yourself as a senior leader, um, through, I guess, not listening as effectively as what maybe one could. That's the reason why I've chosen that. Actually, I want to go down a different route and actually want to spend that time. Remember one leader that I sat under a number of years ago, they introduced skip level meetings. And it was just I'd never experienced that in my career, right? But they introduced skip level meetings. I was in leadership at the time. Um, but the great thing about the skip level meeting was that me as a leader, I had access to like director level or chief level, for example, right? In having that time, and it generally they were like maybe half an hour meetings once a month or something like that, right? So it wasn't a large amount of time. But what that did for me was that it really supported my development and enabled my voice to be heard with that senior leadership that sat within the organization. And actually, especially from what they were hearing from their leader, it would help give more body to whatever they were seeing and hearing, and therefore give them the capability to make different types of decisions. So, like me now, for example, in coming into the institute, yeah, I've got my 6 direct reports as leaders, but I've spent a lot of time in having those skip level meetings, even up until now. And I'm 14 months in now to working for the institute. And now we even still have skip level meetings with individuals because the richness of what I hear from them and how it helps to shape my perspective as a director in the organization. For me, I feel that that's priceless. But something's got to give, and I guess it's, well, what is it that gives, and how do you therefore gain that balance in being able to prioritize that time versus what you're going to have to sacrifice?
Yeah. And with that in mind, how do you manage this then? Do you keep it more instinctual and just try to remember to have these conversations, or have you created something more structured, um, such as, scheduling regular meetings and opportunities to gain this feedback?
Initially, what I'd set up initially, and I probably did this for about the first 6 months or so in the institute, was that I established skip level meetings with everybody within my function, which was incredibly time consuming. But because I was newer in the institute, I guess I was afforded to have that time, in just really getting under the skin of everything and having a more thorough understanding as to what was going on and what I needed to kind of jump on, what was low hanging fruit, how do I, support having greatest impact as quickly as possible and bring in change. So I did it with everybody initially, but then it got to a point in time whereby that way for everyone within, like I said, I've got 30 odd people, within the commercial function. It's not feasible to have that as a lifestyle continually. So what I did, it got to a transitionary point of saying to everybody, right, we've gone on this journey, we've got to know each other, we've been able to connect. I'm now handing it over to you. So my diary is open. If you want to have time and if you still want to have those skip level meetings and you see value in it, schedule the time in, and I will open up my diary for you. If you don't and you feel okay and you just carry on the work that you're doing with your leader and and you're happy, perfectly fine. I'm not offended. But if you see the value in being connected, with director level leadership and you feel like it will enrich you and support you in your career journey, I am more than happy to invest in that. And there have been a number of staff members that have done that, and we've been able to continue going on that journey. But I think it's just to go a step further, it's not just having the time for employees that are not your direct reports and hearing them and getting that more rounded picture. It's also spending time with the customers that you serve. So at the same time, every week, to be honest, I'll typically spend, even if it's one or two meetings, usually a handful of meetings, but just meeting with members, meeting with partners, meeting with, other industry voices out there, and again, just hearing firsthand what's actually going on. What does the real world look like within payroll, right? What are the real challenges today and, for what's to come? Because all of that together just helps to shape ensuring that myself, as a director within the institute, are making the best decisions for our industry.
Yeah, one analogy I often use with my team is, when we're stuck in the hustle and bustle of doing what we do, it's like sometimes being in the fog, and what you need is, from somebody who's not in that day-to-day operational chaos to give you just a simple external perspective on the same challenge. But what I've experienced throughout various organizations is the variety in individuals. So you've got some people who are extroverted, who want to speak up, who will proactively make suggestions. And then you've got some individuals who are reluctant to speak up because they don't necessarily have the confidence or feel empowered to do so. How do you ensure that we get that feedback from a broader range rather than it just being the select few who are willing to speak up? How do you encourage the less confident or more anxious individuals to partake in this?
Do you know what? That's a cracking question, and I think it's super important, something as a consideration, most definitely. We have that challenge internally now. Everybody's different here, as a part of the institute, and what again, it's that challenge of time. So because I find it important personally, I've taken the time to get to know people. So, like for example, I'll be on site. Our office is in Solihull, so I'll be on site typically 2 days a week, right? And I'll try my best to make sure there's at least maybe 1, 2 hours free in my diary just to go and talk to people on the floor and just to connect with people and build those relationships, right? Because, and what that has done and what that has fostered is that for those who may be quieter members of the team, in giving them that space and in having that level of, I guess, relatability, it opens up those kind of conversations so that, whether it's out on the floor or whether it's just the one-to-one that they wanted to schedule in, or whether it's just a quick chat maybe before jumping into a meeting with them or something like that, we're able to have those kind of conversations because there's a level of familiarity. And I've been able to consider, yeah, that one person might be loud and an extrovert and be more than happy to put their hand up and make suggestions, but actually we've got to proactively make space for those who are not willing to do that and those who maybe are a bit more introverted and a bit quieter. Even like another example, even like in group meetings, right? And I'm sure every organization has this. In meetings, let's say you've got a meeting of 10 people, you'll probably have about 3 people who want to answer every question. They've got every idea under the sun, right? But in managing meetings like that, to really help to support drawing out of those quieter staff members and giving them the space and an opportunity to have a voice, which I think if you don't proactively do that and understand them well enough as to how to draw that out of them, that can be very difficult for those quieter staff members.
To what extent do you think organizational culture plays a part here? So, for example, in your own experience, you've moved around from different organizations. Do you think that you could have done the same thing in every organization, or is there something specific about the culture that you're within now where you're able to reinforce this culture with that mindset of openness and almost like a flat hierarchy mindset where everybody's opinion matters?
To be honest, I think it more so comes down to leadership style. I think organizational culture as a whole will always play a part in these kind of things, right? But I think ultimately, whoever's leading is able to facilitate a type of environment for the staff members that they're responsible for. So for me, my leadership brand, so to speak, is the 3 Cs, right? So coaching, culture, and communication. So earlier on in my leadership journey, one thing that I reflected on was from my perspective, what were some of the key challenges that I was seeing within business, both internally and externally as well. And generally, I found that things would be challenging, or maybe performance go downhill, or things like that, namely because of poor culture being fostered, which many times is fed by leadership, because of poor communication, that things may actually be well and all right, but bad communication can shift people's mindsets to be more negative, right? So communication, and then coaching in having a leadership style that empowers people and gives them room to grow. I've seen a lot of things, micromanagement and lack of trust and things like that within leadership, which isn't a coaching type of leadership, right? So for me, the thing that I've tried to focus on is those 3 Cs: coaching, culture, communication. And in taking that kind of approach, I'll be honest with you, from when I came into the institute, I would say that we had a good culture anyway, and that we had a positive, culture anyway. But it wasn't perfect, and there were challenges. And I would say that it's very different now, I'd say in a positive way in comparison to what it was, because of things like that, in intentionally creating a type of culture that would help to support move the institute forward.
So, but again, frankly speaking, what kind of have you experienced, and if so, what kind of pushbacks have you experienced within the wider organization when you try to broaden this mindset of listening down the ladder, so to speak?
Tradition.
Yeah.
Tradition. Probably the key phrase, we've always done it that way. Uh,
Yes.
and
Yes.
again, it's probably not just unique to us as an institute, right? But just breaking down those mental barriers of just because we've always done something a certain way, it doesn't mean we should do it that way moving forward. So especially earlier on in my tenure here, I asked the question why a lot. I asked
Mhm.
it in different ways, but the question was why. And it probably comes from my training as a professional coach as well. But if you ask why enough and you find that there isn't actually a strong enough reason to validate why something's being done, it probably doesn't actually need to be done that way.
Yeah, I think it's a very wise phrase that can be applied to so many different contexts. And yeah, the way we've done things around here is a very costly mindset in so many different ways. Um, so, with regard to the success that you've had or the recognition, obviously you've used an example where you've had an idea that's resulted into something that's provided feedback. This is the best ever that we've seen from your audience in regard to the event. Um, that's a great example. How do you validate those ideas and opinions? If you've got 15 junior staff, all with conflicting ideas, how do you actually choose what to listen to, and at some point also do a sanity check on what's not really realistic or not feasible because of the reality of the way in which things are done in some contexts?
It goes through ideas like that, do go through a level of scrutiny. But what I would say though is that and the scrutiny comes from within the given team itself. So, for example, with that example, scrutiny within the marketing team itself, scrutiny within the leadership team as well, scrutiny across SLT, the directors looking at it, our CEO looking at it and seeing something as significant as that, because it was for our flagship event. A lot of eyes needed to be on that and considerations as to whether it was the right thing to do, or whether to support it or not. But I would say that the scrutiny came through the lens of, let's do this thing, but let's find out why we shouldn't do it. And why that perception is quite important is because I think many times ideas can be put forward and the default can be, we're not intending on doing this, but actually, why doesn't somebody or a paper or whatever justify as to why we should? So you're almost starting from a negative lens, and then you're having to justify and prove why it should be done. Rather, we've tried to have the lens of, do you know what? We want to endorse new ideas and be creative and go in a different direction. That is our default, in that we want to accept this thing, but let's challenge why maybe we shouldn't. And I think that puts more of a positive slant on embracing creativity and supporting people having a voice as to, putting their ideas forward for consideration.
That's a great perspective. So, as you're speaking, again, as a fellow leader of people, uh, as leaders, we like to think that we're open-minded. I think our own personal ego, is a big hurdle to overcome, and we like to think that we're all ears. Our door is always open. We're happy to um, listen to new ideas, but that might not necessarily be the case from everybody else's perspective. How do we as leaders check ourselves, so to speak? How do we actually validate, are we being open-minded enough, and are we listening to those junior voices enough, or are we just comforting ourselves that we're doing that, but in reality not creating a platform where people feel confident or comfortable to speak up?
Nej, I think I think culture plays a big part in answering that question, you know. And I say that because I think as a leader, I think we should ask ourselves the question, how honest are our staff willing to be with us? You know, if somebody gives us feedback, you know, they may have an idea or they may think that something could be done better. If they give us feedback or they put forward an idea and whatnot, how do we respond to it? Do we respond defensive? Do we respond negatively? Do we respond where biting the head off? Or, you know, what
Yeah.
does that response look like, right? Because, and that's why I say it's culture, because if within your team or your operation, a culture is fostered whereby things like that are not welcomed, honesty isn't welcomed, then guess what? You're going to silence that kind of voice with the people that you're responsible for. You know, why would you? I've had it before myself, you know, going up the on my leadership journey where I believe that you should be transparent and that you should be honest. I think you've got to communicate things in the right way. You can't just speak your mind all the time, right? You've got to be mindful of your audience. You've got to craft what it is that you're communicating for whoever you're communicating it to, especially in relation with their world and whatever remit of responsibility they've got. But I do believe that you should be honest and there should be an air of transparency. And I know that for myself, that's got me in trouble sometimes
Mm.
because not every leader's receptive to that, and not every leader wants honesty, really.
Yeah.
I'm really grateful that here at the Institute, working under Jason, and we've had some very honest conversations about things. He's been so receptive and he's been supportive of that kind of approach. I said it to him from when we had when we were going through the interview process, you know, before even starting the role. I was like, look, me as a leader, that's the kind of approach that I take. And I appreciate that it's not always welcomed, but he very much, you know, endorsed that approach and he's been true to his word. But not everyone has that luxury, unfortunately.
Yeah, a lot of people like to be surrounded by yes men and women, and uh, you know, this brings me back to a lot of conversations I've had, especially with professionals within the membership organization who talk about the importance of culture, and it touches every facet of the business, from digital transformation to how you manage events to how you do your recruitment to how you handle education and professional development. Um, and almost every time we come back to the same conclusion, and that culture needs to be driven from the very top of the organization. It needs to be adopted in the right way at the top of the
Yeah.
organization and then to trickle down. And that will then open up the movement of information and
Yes.
knowledge from the bottom up. Um, and I've certainly tried to do that within my own organization. Sometimes I've
Mm.
succeeded, sometimes I've failed, depending on who you ask and when you ask them, because priorities change. But what else I have noticed is, as your organization expands, you hire additional leaders who are essentially create a layer between yourself and the wider workforce, because, once you hit a certain size, there's only there's only so far a completely flat organizational structure can operate. And what I've
Yeah.
noticed in my experience is the impact that those hires can have. So I've hired some particularly talented individuals, but they've had an immensely negative impact on the culture from people around them. And then the opposite was also true. I've hired individuals that I wasn't sure whether they were going to make it or not, but the impact that they had on the culture and the wider workforce was so positive that made up for their shortcomings. Um,
Okay.
how do we scale this, right? So Adrian, you've got this mindset, and I love the approach and the three C's. But what happens tomorrow if Adrian needs to hire four more Adrians underneath him? Because the workforce around you is growing at such a rate. How do you ensure that culture trickles down, but also how do you identify the bad apples? Because it can be very damaging.
Indeed, indeed. It's an interesting way how the question's been positioned. I think there's a lot I can say about this, but what I'd say initially is that I'll be honest with you, I wouldn't want to hire a number of Adrians in the sense of, and what I mean by that is that for whoever I hire, obviously I want them to hire them for a particular position, and yes, I want them to support the given culture that's within the organization, but I want them to be the best them.
Yeah.
And what I want to do is look at, well, actually, who are you as an individual? What is your makeup? And actually, for whatever type of person you are, whatever version of leader you are, how can that then really amplify our culture even more from a positive point of view, right? Um, Now, you're always going to get bad apples. That's an absolute fact. You're always going to get people who, no matter how good you may well be as a leader, you're always going to get people that are just simply not going to align with that. People who might not like your personality type, people who may not be aligned with your vision, and you still have to manage those people, and you still have to, I guess, take them on a journey and try as much as possible to get them to be in that alignment. But it may not always work. I know it's not always worked for me, for example. And then but I think there's a lot of value, and again, being honest with that approach. I know I've had conversations before in being quite direct with leaders, in just being clear that we don't get on, or we don't, we're not, and we don't need to be best of friends, right? That's not what we need here. But what we need to have is, we need to have a united front. We need to have an aligned goal in regards to the direction that we're going, and we need to at least be on the same page with some fundamental things as to how we move forward and take the organization forward. Now, if that can't work, and if those fundamental things can't work, and there's that misalignment, then maybe that person's not right for the organization. And I guess that's a different kind of conversation. But I think you at least need to give the individual an opportunity to understand there is a misalignment. And
Yeah.
actually, there's work that we need to do. So one thing that I've done, or that I'm in the process of doing right now internally with my leaders, is we've all done personality tests, for example, right? In
That's a
first, just
dangerous
making sure that
exercise.
it's been super interesting though, right? Because one, I'm keen, and I've done these tests before, so I'm well aware as to how I show up as a leader and my own shortfalls, because I do have, I've got a number of shortfalls in my own leadership, right? But I've also got certain superpowers as well that I'm aware of, and therefore I'm able to be proactive in how I kind of shape my leadership team and how I work with them, and be forthcoming with, guys, this is what I'm like. This is how we could probably best work together, right? I need my team to also have that level of awareness in being very clear on what their personality types and their leadership styles look like, so that we can have the best and healthiest working relationship, but actually them collaboratively can also be aware and have the best working relationship with each other. And where we can identify complementary behaviors, amazing. Like, let's elevate each other and make each other stronger. Where we have clashes, let's be mindful of that and make sure that we're proactively working around it, so we can have the strongest leadership culture.
It's very commendable that you've got, as a personality trait, I would say, that openness to look within and recognize that we all have strengths and we all have areas where we can improve. And I think what this speaks to is that being a leader takes more than certain qualifications or level of experience. Being the best
Yeah.
salesperson does not mean you're going to be a great sales leader. And I think we need to put more onus on the personality traits rather than just the CV and qualifications somebody brings when selecting our leaders, because the leader can have that positive impact, or it can have the opposite. So getting a little bit.
I think no, just before we move on that
No,
point, I think no, right? So I think about 7, 8 years into my leadership journey, I completed a level 5 qualification in professional coaching. So I always believed in what I understood to be a coaching style of leadership and endorsed like empowering people and things like that. But until I'd completed that qualification, I didn't actually understand the depth of it or the real
Mhm.
intricacies to sit behind it, various models that can be used as a leader. So I would say that, and probably the number one thing I took away from that qualification, which took my leadership in a whole different direction, was reflection and the
Mhm.
power of reflection as a leader in just giving yourself time to stop and think and process and evaluate. Are you actually getting the right outcomes and bringing the right things out of the people that you're responsible for? Or do you need to pivot and go in a different direction to bring the best out of them? So I'd say that like qualifications and learning and everything like that definitely has its place, and it's had a profound impact on me. But I think if anything, it's a toss up of the two that probably adds the most value as a leader.
No, thank you for that insight. So yeah, we can all work on ourselves, but would you say that anybody can become a leader with the personality traits and the tests that you've done? Can every personality essentially become a leader, or is it something that's suited more to some rather than others?
There's going to be divided opinions on this one, what I'm going to respond to now. But I would say that everyone can be a manager. I'm not convinced that everybody can be a leader. I think they're two different things. I think if you can manage and lead, then that's amazing. And actually, you'll be so impactful as an individual. Um, I found that a lot of people are great at managing or
Yeah,
great at leading, but it can be a challenge to be good at both. So we think of management as, more so the kind of structural aspects, the processes, the I guess the typical responsibilities, of having a team of people and ensuring that they're efficient and working well and they're doing the job and all those mechanics, right? That's your management side. But your leadership, it's as the word is, it's you're at the forefront and are people willing to follow you.
yeah,
That's the key sign of leadership. You don't need a job title to be a leader.
correct.
Leadership is the ability to influence people, the ability to be able to take people on a journey, right? And the ability to inspire, envision, create something in somebody that maybe wasn't there before. That's what leadership provokes. It's quite different to management. Like I said, if you can do both, that's really impactful.
Yeah, it reminds me of very early on in my sales career when I joined this recruitment. Well, there was this recruiter who would do these 3-day selection days, and there would be about 60 candidates for each one, and only two would get selected as candidates that they would take on and get out into the market and invest in and trade. And I'm pleased to say that I was one of the two, but I had a little bit of an edge. I figured out what they were looking for, because they were looking for
Okay.
leadership. And so you'd go in and they'd divide us into these groups, and it'd be 3 days. It'd be very similar to, say, Apprentice, where they give you tasks that, as a group of random individuals thrown together, you've got to overcome. And almost everybody thought that it was who's going to be the loudest and who's going to speak the most. But what became apparent to me was that actually that's not what they're looking for. What they're looking is for somebody who can manage all of these people trying to be loud. So what I figured out is actually let everybody have their voice and let them feel like they're having their 5 minutes, but then through logic and structure, just control the structure of that dialogue so that you essentially heard the whole group in the right direction. So yeah, I couldn't agree with you more on that point. And there will be a lot of opinions of this. To put
Yeah.
my neck on the line, I'm strictly of the opinion that some people are natural leaders, some aren't. You can improve your ability to lead, but there's some personalities that are just not meant for leadership. And I love the fact that you separated management and leadership, because that's a great way of looking at it. There's a lot of managers out there that will do a great job managing a certain function, or a set of functions, set of individuals, but they're not necessarily going to be leaders. Um,
Yeah.
what also jumps out here is I noticed when I first joined an American company, there was, previously I'd always worked with one sales leader. But a
Okay.
lot of these bigger American companies, they have a sales leader, sales director, and then a sales operations director. And in my earlier
Mm.
days, I couldn't differentiate between the two. But one of them was there to manage. To manage is everybody doing these tasks, ticking off the boxes. The other guy was there to inspire and to actually
Yeah.
make you want to perform. So it's the first time I've heard somebody break it down in this way. So really, really like that, Adrian. We could talk about this all day, I'm sure, but we are finite on time. So I want to leave this conversation with a little bit of practical advice from you to other leaders out there that listen to this, that might take something away from it. So to myself and to any of the leaders listening out there, what's one practical bit of advice you can give? What can we do today to become better leaders or become better at listening down the ladder, so to speak?
Yeah, I would say fundamentally be curious and stay curious. Okay. Be curious in just as a leader, especially if you're a leader of leaders, you cannot be involved in everything. It's just not possible. And you shouldn't be involved in everything. You should be able to trust the leaders that you are responsible for, or whoever it is that you've appointed within your infrastructure. But that doesn't stop curiosity. That doesn't stop, like I said, asking that question, that why, that let me just understand that a little bit more. And I think that curiosity for me on my journey as a leader and my journey here at the Institute as well, that curiosity has uncovered a lot of things that I've been able to work through and that have actually been quite impactful here within the Institute as well. So I would say, yeah, be curious and stay curious.
Okay, that's a great bit of advice. Now, what was the main um, takeaway? Let's say, is there a measurable step that organizations can take? Is there, curiosity is within us and it's individual as a leader, but as an organizational leader, if I want to see or almost test the culture within my organization, the wider management team, are there any practical tips that you can give um,
Yeah.
that we could do to actually almost give ourselves a score? Where are we on this, or to be more open to listening down the line?
Think the best way to go about it, and I'd say that this ties into our us as the CIPP. We've recently released our new strategy and aspects of our strategic canvas for what we're going to be doing, the direction that we're going in then over the next 5 years. And fundamentally where that has come from, it's come from listening to one another as an SLT. It's come from listening to all of our managers and floor staff, across the institute. It's come from listening to our members via surveys and also the day-to-day interactions that we have from what we hear from our employees. It's come from listening to our board as well, who are specialists across the field within the payroll profession. It's come from taking the time to gather all of that information and not just have our own perspective as individual leaders, but actually hearing the voices internally and externally as a measuring stick as to whether we're thinking in the right way and whether we're going in the right direction. So I think just as we began the call, it's fundamentally important to spend time to just listen. You know, I love the saying, you've got two ears and you've got one mouth. So listen twice as much as you speak. And that's what we should be doing as leaders.
Great advice. Well, Adrian, it's been a pleasure having this discussion with you. You're clearly a very insightful leader, and I'm sure
Thank you.
your team is going to go on to great things. See, I'm not giving you the credit there, I'm giving your team the credit there. Hopefully, they'll come up with a lot more ideas. Thank you again, and I look forward to discussing this with you in the future again.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the invitation.